If you've never lived with a huge body of water at your back, you'll never really get the Great Lakes. People from outside the region think that they're like any other friendly little local lakes. And they're wrong. They are a sea unto themselves. They are a massive living things. You hear old sailors talk about their awe of the ocean, the reverence for its indifferent violence for its depths. The ocean is our mother, where we grew our first lungs and legs to leave her. And when we return still thinking of the woman who raised us, we are confronted with a stranger. Part of being human is to forget and then learn all at once again. The cruelty of water. I live on the eastern side of Lake Michigan. My childhood home is right on the water. We get some of the worst rip currents in the lake systems, when the wind planes over the water in such a way that the tide sucks it down into it. Everybody knows somebody who's drowned or almost drowned. Mostly kids. For my part, I know a lot of drowners. I hate it here. I truly do. You hear that from most people who get trapped in their hometowns all their lives, but I think I'm more entitled to my resentment than most. I couldn't have been older than 6, so I don't remember much of it. But when I was little, I drowned. Most of the time when that happens, it's kids who don't know better, goofing off near a sandbar and getting pulled under. You see, the rip current makes the surface of the water go smooth, and especially on the lake where the water is always choppy, it makes a tempting sight for a child who isn't the strongest swimmer. And I wasn't. I liked the water at that age, according to my mother. But what I would really do is go and splash around it with my arm floaters on. I couldn't have been prepared. What does stick in my mind was that moment that it happened. I was running over to my friend Kathy through what looked like a shallow, calm water when I went to put my foot down, and the lake decided to take me. Currents are stronger the deeper you go. I remember the undertow yanking me down, doing somersaults in the dark. I'd scream before going down, so my mouth was open to receive every ounce of lake that could fit into it. And obviously, they pulled me out and squeezed all that water out of me. And I lived. But at a cost. I have chronic pneumonia. I'm physically weaker than any other person my age due to lung and nerve damage. I stayed out of the water for a long time. My first time I knew for sure that I had to get out of here, I was 14. Being sick from a young age makes you realize things that don't normally settle in for most people into their 50s. Being born is a death sentence and my body is falling apart. I try not to be a downer with other people, because I already had enough trouble at school being the cripple kid, but it did give me an early appreciation for psychoactives. I was friendly with Harry because his older brother had cheap weed, and he was good for edibles. For obvious reasons, I tried not to smoke. We would walk around town high as hell, go down to the shore and kick litter around in the weeds. Sometimes a group of us, and sometimes just me and him. And in my memory, it wasn't so much that we were particularly close. Kids just picked people to hang around. I think he liked that I laughed at his stupid jokes. The pot made me giggly. It was dead summer, muggy air and Michigan mosquitoes. The only place that you could go to and get away from the heat was by the water where the rolling breeze kept you cool. We had a little spot, a patch of shore where the reeds and yellow grasses didn't encroach on the sand. Weeds rippled beneath the waves like tiny grasping hands. It's too goddamn hot, Harry said for the 200th time, like I hadn't heard my dad say the same all week. It's the global warming, I replied. He was further down the shore, close to the lapping water. I'd sat up on a log with my cane on my lap, watching the sand fleas. It was never this hot when we were little. You remember that? I'd remember it getting to be 99 degrees outside. You would, maybe. I can't even remember what I ate this morning. And I rolled my eyes at him. Yeah, well, You wouldn't. He grinned back at me over his shoulder, plucking at his sweaty shirt. I was tired in that soft, slow, wispy way, between being high out of my mind and being baked much more literally by the August sun. I remember thinking that he was going to ask me to be his girl, that it had been leading up to this point. I wouldn't have minded, maybe even wanted it a little. But he didn't. Henry pulled off his shirt and threw it at me and said, "Sure you don't want to come in?" I told him yes, and I was sure. I bundled his shirt up in my arms, and he shrugged and jumped in. The dark water of the shallows splashed like an actual cannonball that had fallen in. Henry didn't come back up. Unable to comprehend, I watched that spot for a while. How long could Henry hold his breath? He shouldn't have been able to sink very deep from where he was on the shore. I knew something was wrong, and the longer I sat there staring, the worse it would get. But I couldn't will myself to move. My body was heavy with dread, with the oppressive weight of being stoned. And I woke up there. Or, not quite there. I woke up in the water, soaked up to my shoulders by an incoming wave. Henry's shirt was still balled up in my hands, turning from orange to bloody red by the tide. I looked around for him and I saw nothing but a weedy beach all around. I dropped his shirt and left it there. Even moving, my leg hurt, and I needed all of my strength to brace against the pain on the walk home. My shoes were heavy with water the whole way. A dark red bruise circled my ankle, like a ligature or grasping hand. His parents and the local cops organized a search, and they knew that I was probably the last to see him. So I lied and I said that we had split up on the way home. I said maybe that he went back to the shore, and when I remembered that shirt, it felt like a godsend. I got to tell them that he went back for it, and I walked home alone. And they found it right there on our patch of lake. I don't know why. I don't know why I lied, except that I thought that I'd go to jail or something for not helping. Like it would be my fault that I couldn't go in after him. Anyway, they fished him out eventually. It looked like he had gotten tangled up in the seaweed and drowned himself to get free. If it gets wrapped around your ankle and you try to tug yourself out, it'll only tie tighter and drag you down. My parents knew something was wrong. For Dad, this manifested as concern. Checking up on me, trying to take me to the movies on the weekend. You know, Dad stuff. For my mother, she became clingy. She was religious, and she went out to the lake every morning to pray. She'd been baptized in these waters, and so had I. And Christ would wash away our sins, and blah, blah, blah. Getting me to come and pray with her had become her mission for the rest of the summer, so she could wash away the unholiness that had settled upon me. I didn't go. My dad was always really supportive. I mean, he got it. He wasn't local like my mother. She'd lived in the same area basically her whole life, while he'd moved around everywhere before settling down with her. We were really close. He took me to physical therapy and piano, and we watched movies together when I was sick, on my side with chest and throat coated in Vicks and him bringing us hot tea and ginger soup. He helped me write my college essay, and when I got a full ride to a university out of state, it doesn't matter anymore where or for what. He couldn't have been prouder. Neither of my parents had gone to college. He kept telling me that I was going to make something of myself. He drove me down there and moved me into my dorm while Mother sulked at home. I remembered I was on edge the whole time in a way that I couldn't explain. It was a smell, landlocked by the whole time that he was helping me take my stuff in. I could smell brine. I thought something of mine had gotten wet somehow and gotten mildewed. Dad didn't notice anything. I didn't bring it up to him. Thought he would worry and it would mess this up for us both. It was already so hard to leave. He gathered me up close in the parking lot as I was walking him out, and he asked me, "You feel ready, Junebug?" And I said I did. And he went home, and that wet smell went with him. Maybe it was in his car or on his clothes, I thought. He was a strong swimmer. He loved the water. He never would have done something as stupid as jumping in the lake in the middle of the night. I got the call 3 weeks into my first semester, telling me that he'd washed ashore a little ways down the coast. I had to drop out. My mother was inconsolable and needy, and it was soon enough in the semester to cancel without any penalties. Next year, I promised myself. I had plenty of time. Next year turned into the year after that. Then I was halfway through my 20s. It was never the right time. My mother always needed me, financially or emotionally. I got a job in town, of course. Got a cheap car, like a token attempt at independence. She couldn't make me go to church or wake up at sunrise any more than she could when I was a child. But even if she gave up on my soul, she wouldn't give up on my wallet. My life was a dime. Algae creeping malaise before I met Mitch. I worked at the back office of a gardening supply company, and he was our mail guy every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. He came by the office window in the afternoons and chatted me up while I got the overnight shipping together for him. I'd forgotten how it felt to meet someone. Not just exist in their proximity, but to be with them. Work chats became shared lunches, Sunday coffee dates, moving, driving out of the city to find a nice restaurant. Mitch was a gentleman. He liked fishing and chick flicks. He didn't look at me like a lame dog on the road when I went out with crutches. Both of us together couldn't afford a place of our own, and he couldn't get me on the lease with his roommates even if I wanted him to. And when we got married, he said to me once we'd have our own place if he had to build it himself. This was his way of proposing, lobbing it up in the air for me to take as I might. I said that I would hold the nails for him. But there was still the issue of the water between us. The first time that he stayed at my mother's house, at my house, it was on the verge of a summer storm. A hurricane had come on the East Coast, and we were bound to feel the ripples of it. How many storms had I lived through until now? I just had a feeling about this one. The dread. This briny smell in my nose all day as the clouds stifled the sky. And like an idiot, I asked Mitch to stay the night. He met my mother, and she hated him. He dragged my queen bed out from the wall so that way we both could climb in, and left the window cracked. For tornadoes, he said, for the air pressure. With the window open even a little, the storm's wailing came right inside. Rain and wind, rattling the trees and the pier. Looks like it's gonna get bad out there. Could be a big one, he teased. I told him I didn't find it funny. I didn't want to think about what might happen. He kissed my head and apologized. Sleep stole my memories. I don't know how I got to rest at all with the storm howling the way that it did, knowing the lake was right outside and leaping up to me. I remember a lot of things from that night so perfectly, but I don't remember my dream. It was only as I was surfacing from the dark that I heard his voice. He whispered to me, just on the verge of awareness. You sure you don't want me to come? I woke up with something wrapped around my ankle. It was too cold to be a tongue. I couldn't process it so soon after waking, and just pulled my foot away by instinct, still half asleep. The cold, wet thing dragged over my foot and off my skin. And there was a noise then. Some kind of, I don't know, a hiss or a sigh. It was quick and quiet and sounded like air between gritted teeth as the squeak of a window being shut fast. It jolted me awake. Pulse speeding up, I stared around. In the dark, scattered with cloud-choking moonlight, nothing seemed real. No more noises. Total silence. I rubbed my ankle and shivered. My skin was cold to the touch. Was it always so dark at night? I braced a foot on the floor, anxious to hit the light, and yanked my leg back up, cursing. Fuck! Wet rug. I tried again and I stood up, head swimming. The floor was soaking. Were we flooding somehow? Had the storm raised the lake to my doorstep to swallow me? I stumbled across the floor, splashing through the thin puddle on the hardwood until I could get to the light switch. Skidding, I slammed into the wall and fumbled for the light, and there was nothing but the dark and wet. My vision went sideways and I hit the ground. My head whistled past the bedside drawer and barely missed cracking my skull open in the dark. I was yelling for Mitch, groping around for the silhouette of the bed and struggling to get to my feet. I found the sheets and they were squishy, waterlogged. I couldn't tell the difference at first between that and his skin. And that's when I started screaming. I'm so grateful that I couldn't see him, because he felt like I could tear through his skin like a swollen pepper. My mother found me scrambling around, blind for my inhaler. The crying had choked me until instinct kicked in. She pointed a flashlight in my face, and behind the beam of light, she was a faceless god putting me on trial. She grabbed my arm and shook me.
"You went to bed alone,"
she kept saying.
"You went on the pier to fish before the storm came in. Do you understand? You went to bed early waiting for him to come inside. Are you listening to me?"
I was listening. I don't know why she was coaching me. I was suffocating on my fluids and she wouldn't let me use my inhaler. The interrogation finally stopped, and the light moved in. She left me curled up in the dark to take my medicine. His body thumped when he hit the carpet, and again I thought about rotting vegetables. The sound an overripe melon makes when it liquefies and splits. Lucky for her, my bedroom was on the ground floor to spare me from the stairs. I coughed myself sideways and I laid there for God knows how long before she came in. She dragged me to the couch and told me to stay there while she took care of things. She always took care of things. The police took me away when they came around, my feeble little body and swollen, wet face, and they said, "Well, ain't it a tragedy?" I hated her. She hovered around in the doorway watching for any sign of betrayal, and I knew it was her. She had taken Mitch and Dad, and somehow she had taken Henry. She had taken me, too small to understand and trapped in this body I hated in this town that I despised. I knew it. I knew her. I wished the lake would take her. And then it did. 7 a.m., visiting with the water as per routine. I looked up when I heard her yelp, like she had been bitten. She was already on her side in the sand. A dark, shiny thing had her leg in its grip. Her eyes only had a second to bulge at me. Hateful. And then she slid into the water with barely a splash. I didn't quit my job. I didn't talk to anybody. I threw a handful of clothes on my back seat and I left. I felt like that girl from Psycho. You know, at the beginning of the movie. Guilty runner. Nowhere to run to. And then, fuck. At the southern edge of Illinois, the rain started back up again. And I pulled over to a motel and I stayed the night. The sound of the shower woke me up. The drumbeat of water on the tile like sheets of rain. I lay frozen in bed, heaping with cheap hotel duvets, staring at the bathroom door. It had been left open a crack, golden light pouring into my dark room. I could see wisps of steam curling in the sliver of light, making the air taste wet. And more than anything, I wanted to go back to sleep. Of course I was afraid, but it was a numb fear. The kind that comes over you without even the decency to give you a shot of adrenaline. What else could I do? I had already run away, and it had found me here. I might as well roll over and get some sleep. I forced myself upright, trying not to creak the bed or rustle the sheets too loudly. The shitty carpet squished wetly between my toes. Flooded. Yes, now I could see the water pouring slowly out from under the bathroom door, sloshing out from an overflowing tub. The lake was here. I couldn't make out anything distinct behind the bubble glass of the shower door and the steam fog gathering on it. Just a dark shape, rendering deep algae green by the barren fluorescent light, rising and falling with breaths drowned out by the patter of the shower water. It hadn't taken me. I was here, and it hadn't taken me. It never had. no matter how much I wanted it to.
Hello?
I said stupidly, not sure of what else to say. It rumbled for a bit before it spoke.
You feel ready, Junebug?
It asked with my dad's voice. And with my mother's, it asked.
Do you understand?
I was. I did. And we came to an agreement. The lake. And I. The man wearing my face was sitting at the bus stop bench, reading a book. I live in the Midwest United States in an in-between town. I moved here about 5 years back, which makes me one of the few people to move in and out in the last decade. We're pretty small. Too small for most chain restaurants. The kind of town where you got your McDonald's and all, but no Applebee's. But we're big enough that you don't really know the people around you so well. The girl at the counter of the coffee place knows my name and my usual order, but not much else. We're too out of the way to be a pit stop on the way to the nearest town, but the county buses run through because people need to get to work. Was that too much detail about the local food scene? I don't know. I think it's important. I want you to understand. Anyway, I was at the coffee place when I saw him. I work at an auto repair shop a bit out of town, and I'm an insomniac. So on my lunch break, I get a coffee just about every day so that I can make it to the end of my shift. Jake teases me about it. I'm kind of a big, grimy dude, and I get the girliest drinks. Sue me for having a sweet tooth. So I'm standing by the window, waiting on my order. At first, I didn't think anything really, beyond just, oh, that's a new face. But my eyes linger, and I get that prickly sensation all over my brain, screaming at me that something's wrong. I only ever felt it so strong a couple times before in my life. Once, when I was out deer hunting with my dad and we saw a coyote, who we realized in a minute was rabid. The other was at trade school and I saw some fuckhead posting up by my truck, and just knew that he was waiting for me. The first thing I could recognize was the haircut, the height, and the general shape of his face. He was at a distance and hard to make out, and I might not have noticed if my subconscious hadn't hooked him. I heard someone say once that you've never seen your face, just pictures and reflections. But I've seen it, I guess. It was sort of like the first time that you see a video of yourself, distorted compared to what you see in the mirror. The barista broke my attention to give me my coffee, and I forgot about him for a minute before I walked out to my truck. I was just across the street from him, and I looked at him and... fuck. Those were my eyes. He even dressed like me. Not like he was in the exact same clothes, but the kind of nondescript thing that I'd usually wear. Flannel over denim, work boots. His clothes were cleaner than mine usually looked. But this time I was full on staring, coffee in hand. And he looked up, made eye contact, and he smiled just a bit. He waved awkwardly. His smile went to his eyes, like a really earnest smile that somehow made my stomach seize up. And just like that, he went back to his book. Coming out of this, I was woozy, about to stumble every step back to my truck. I never locked the doors, but I did now. It sounds fucking ridiculous in hindsight, especially typing it, but it's hard to explain how it felt to see him. Practically like I was leaving my own body. My skin was clammy and a little numb. To my credit, as much of a baby as I was, I pushed through the rest of the day like normal. I had my coffee and went back for my lunch break. Somebody in town's brakes were wearing thin, and somebody else had junked up their transmission. Ordinary day. The whole time, though, in the back of my head, I was still there on that sidewalk staring at the guy with my face. I slept worse than usual that night. I've had sleeping problems since I was a kid. Doctors said that it was a routineness thing. Any big change from my normal day, I can barely get a wink in. And when Jake first moved in, I got so ornery from the sleep deprivation that we ended up fighting just about every day until I started sleeping on the couch. I stayed up that whole night just staring at the computer. I'd gone on some childish Google rabbit hole on doppelgangers and found nothing that seemed helpful. And at some point I stopped reading and my eyes just glazed over and it was morning. First half of my shift was hell until I hit my second wind. I went to the coffee shop and the dizziness started to set in on the drive over. I know I shouldn't blame the fact that I was running on empty, but I still can't help but think that maybe it was because of him. He was there in the exact same spot when I pulled up. I wouldn't look directly at him, just rushed through to get into the store. Even about 10 yards off, he was like a physical presence, like he might as well have been right up in my ear. I could feel his breaths, slow and even, puffing on the back of my neck. I shook the entire time that I was getting my drink. Coffee girl seemed a bit nervy too. She dropped my change on the counter and didn't smile at me, which just made me feel unsettled. She was normally really perky. Even if it was just fake customer service bullshit, missing it made the atmosphere all that much more alien. When things get bad, I'm the kind of guy who just fades out and into his own head. It's a skill. Like, a bad one, obviously, but a well-fucking practiced skill. I let myself recede back into my skull waiting for my drink. Thought about the work that I had to get to at the shop. Sleep deprivation made zoning out even easier. Up until I left the shop, that is. I didn't even look at him. Maybe it was because I was moving on autopilot and so deep in my nothing place, but I was absolutely punching with sensation as I got up to the outdoor bistro seating. The feeling of paper against my fingertips as I turned a page. A foggy half-image of black text on creamy white. I full-body rocked to a stop and caught myself, coffee spilling in my hand. It was boiling hot and I could barely feel it. There he was, reading his fucking book without a care in the world, smiling with my mouth. He had a shadow of stubble. I hadn't shaved the night before. My first thought was that it felt like he'd tried to rip my soul out of my body. I couldn't move away. I had to know what was wrong with him, or wrong with me. I sat down and I didn't take a sip of coffee. Just stared. He didn't feel me looking at him today, or he pretended not to. But at least when I watched him, I didn't get any more of whatever the fuck that had been. The longer I looked, it was weird. I thought I could see things around him, but not really see them. It was this subtle, heat shimmer. It was all around him, and as I looked, I could almost see it forming this membrane stretching out in every direction, this clear web. A thick fucking tendril of it stretched between me and him, almost present and iridescent and real the harder I stared. If I had the balls, I could have reached out and touched it. And after a little while, I realized that other people were starting to notice him. They'd stop, double take, then stand gawking at him. It seemed weird at first until I realized, of course, they'd be freaked out. I was sitting right there, across the street. I mean, you'd be startled to see two of your neighbor one day, right? Even comforting myself that way, it didn't seem quite right. Like, shit, they don't know me that well. I could have had a twin or something. But when he lifted his head up out of his book and smiled at them, gave a little wave to whoever he had caught staring, they'd act like he punched them. From an outsider's perspective, it was somehow, I don't know, embarrassing? I must have looked at that dumb yesterday. And he sat there for an hour with his book. And then the bus came. I could see him pay with change, laugh a bit at something the bus driver said. And then he escaped. Down the road and towards civilization. I went and threw up in a garbage can, and I'd broken out into a cold sweat. So I called into work and I said that I thought that I had food poisoning. I got chewed out for taking off, but what were they going to do? Bring me in? Have me puke in people's cars? My boss can be such a dick. I texted Jake on the way home and crawled into bed. He waited for me to wake up on my own even after he got to the house, and he brought a big thing of mac and cheese into bed with us to share. Homemade, not that Velveeta shit. God, I loved him so much. And he asked, "Feeling better now, Ringo?" My parents named me Harrison, after the Beatle. He calls me Ringo when he thinks that he's being cute. And I told him yes, I was. He teased me for staying up all night online reading scary stories or whatever. I said I stayed up all night all the time and never threw up over it. Well, that must be because I'm getting old. My elderly body wasn't taking kindly to see how I treated it no more. And I pinched him on the arm. We chatted about other things, God knows what. He can talk for hours without me having to say a word. It's nice. I'm pretty much quiet and recalcitrant by nature. So was my dad. It's nice having someone who can make you laugh and feel like a human being. But he had said something after we had flicked on the news that made me sick all over again. Oh, and I heard the craziest shit from Susie today when she came into the office. I only just barely heard her the first time, and she was up at the nurse's station, you know. I'm trying to read some kid's chart, and I nearly put it down and went over and asked her if she needed to go to the hospital or a fucking psych ward. But I asked her nicely later, and she said, "Baby, guess what she said?" I was half paying attention at this point, splitting my ears between him and tomorrow's weather report. She's pregnant. He threw his head back and laughed. Oh! That'd be harder to believe than what she actually said. She was like adamant that some woman was trying to steal her soul. Color rushed over me and I muted the weather. She what? Yeah, I don't think that she was religious or anything, but no. He stopped and looked at me all bright and concerned. What did she say? Harry, you okay? You've been acting funny all day. Jacob, please. He sighed, kind of frustrated now. I don't know. She just said when she was in town yesterday before her shift, she passes by this woman who tried to rip the soul out of her body. I don't know what it means. It's just Susie being a crackhead. I squeezed the remote and almost broke the damn thing. There were more of them. More doppelganger things. Maybe they were feeling the town out slowly, resident by resident, until they found what they needed. She's not crazy. I know what she means. He squinted at me. This was getting him more agitated. Well, what the fuck does that mean? It dawned on me that I couldn't possibly explain what I had been seeing without sounding like an insane person to my licensed medical professional spouse. I made a half-assed attempt. Mostly vague and avoidant, but I asked him if he'd let me drive him into town before work. He agreed, probably because he was planning on taking me in to seeing the clinic. Maybe he wanted to get a coffee. I don't know. So I brought him there. And the stranger was there. Familiar as ever, in his same spot. And the moment I laid eyes on him, face buried in his book, I could feel him dig into me. Jake stiffened up like a corpse by my side. His hand tried to grab me, but I was already out the door and making a beeline for the man with my face. I barely even waited for traffic. I was so hopped up on being right, on being proven, on knowing that I wasn't going crazy. At that point, even all evidence to the contrary, I was half sure that Jake wouldn't see him at all. And the closer that I got to the guy, shoulders up and tight, the stronger the pull was. I put everything I had into staying clear-headed and ignoring the ghost images of words on paper. I almost got hit by a car for my troubles. People were already staring at him, but as I approached, some of their eyes turned onto me too. I could feel them, like claws and arrows, like the way he pulled at me. And I stopped a few feet away and squared my shoulders. Hey! He sat up and looked straight at me, the air around him shimmering. It was that web, all leading back towards him like some kind of spider. And for a second, I could see the cord between him and me. And it was as thick as my wrist, twice what it was yesterday. Harry, Bright? I asked, looking down at him. And he smiled and shook his head. No, son, I think you got me mixed up with someone else. He pointed at the book in my hands. My knuckles had gone white, gripping so tightly onto it. Could I see that for a minute? Before I could nod, it was his book. Or shake my head. Hadn't I been in the middle of reading it? My hands were empty, one by my side, the other aiming in a casual point to the book in the stranger's lap. The next thing I noticed is the air had been pulled right out of my lungs. Breathing in was like breathing fire for the first second and grabbing my chest. And before I caught my breath, rocking with dizziness and pain in my chest, I could have sworn that I was having a heart attack. The fuck? Y'all be more careful, Harrison. You could get real hurt pulling a stunt like that. He sounded sincere. Was the sickest part of him to me at that time. I was so angry I was shaking with it, sure that I would swing at him any moment. Don't you dare give me that! And he sighed. The whole time, he'd never gotten angry or raised his voice. Well, hey, don't shoot the messenger. You're the one going around looking into things that ain't your business, aren't you? Not my business? You coming to my fucking town where I live and you tell me it's not my business? I haven't done anything. Whose face are you wearing then? He reached up and touched my face. His own face at the edge of our stubble. I don't want any trouble. Well, tell your friend. I don't have friends, Harrison. Not in this town, leastways. He gave me a long, slow blink and looked me up and down, my skin crawling like a ripple tracking with the movement of his gaze. And he smiled. I'm just passing through, he said with my voice. Don't pay me no mind. What the fuck do you— I just try not to think about it. You can't go through your life trying to understand everything that might happen to you. His smile all of a sudden got real damn sad. And I felt that ache in it. I remember the times that I'd smiled like that. I couldn't think of anything to say to him, and he could tell that I was struggling because he lifted his book up like he wanted me to leave him to it. Crime and punishment. I pressed my hand to my chest, where the tightness was turning into a proper knot. I'll be gone tomorrow, he assured me, turning his eyes down to the page. I should have told him to get out of town today if he knew what was good for him. Hell, I should have chased him out myself. But I just ripped myself away. The more I walked, I could feel the hooks under my skin pop off and disappear and the tight feeling start to fade. I got into the car and I turned to Jake. Tears were pouring down his face. His hands were clasped over his mouth to catch the sobs, but I'd never seen him cry like that before. I started fussing incessantly, but he was crying too hard to speak. I asked if he needed to take off the rest of the day, and he nodded. We could pretend that he picked up my stomach bug from me yesterday. And he cried for hours, just uncontrollably. To this day, he won't tell me exactly what happened to him while I was talking to that stranger. But I kind of have an idea. I don't like to think about it. The one thing he did tell me was that the man had his face. And that's when I knew. I went back the next day as early as I could, and sure enough, the man with our faces was there. The air was thick like the humidity just before a big storm. He didn't seem to notice. All the nice people whose routines I had disrupted were stock still, staring at him. And I wanted more than anything to shout for him to get out of there. What the hell kind of game was he playing? Didn't he know this shit was dangerous? And didn't he care about— But anyway, I couldn't get my voice up over the thick silence sliding down my throat. I wasn't the only one. Nobody was willing to make the first move. And then Jeff, the old man who runs the liquor store, came up behind the stranger with the driver that he kept behind the counter for security. He sat up a little. He knew the old man was behind him, and he didn't even turn around. The metal bulb smacked against his shoulder and keeled him right over off the bench. I rolled with the blow. His book fell and I never saw it again after, because in that moment everything turned into chaos. A little under a dozen people rushed for him. I'm not oversensitive or hysterical or what the fuck ever. I swore on God that I could feel everything. I haven't asked anybody else if they felt it too. Steel-toed boots to the gut, dirt and asphalt, and nice folks' hate in your mouth. I don't know if it's worse that they couldn't or could. It was the kind of shit that you only see on the real gritty nature docs, or when you spend a long time sitting still in a deer stand, when all the birds descend on one among them and rip its throat out, or a mama fox bashes her kit to death. It's not malicious. It's a survival instinct. But I've never believed for a second that nature doesn't mean it can't be evil. And as he looked up, made eye contact, his eyes were so big and bloodshot and scared. I could feel him pleading inside my head so loud, and I could feel the bruising and breaking like a phantom sensation under my skin. And I just stood there. Somebody brought their foot down on the center of his face, and it made this horrible cracking sound. And that was when I finally looked away. That was when I finally stopped feeling it. There were a few more moments of scuffling before everyone stopped. He'd quit moving, and I think that it made everyone realize all of a sudden what they were doing and were. After a while, someone got a big sheet and draped him in it, staining it red everywhere. I don't know what they did with him after they wrapped it up and moved him. The coffee shop owner got the hose he used for the flower boxes in his windows, sprayed down the street until the gore washed away. I watched my town murder me. I haven't disguised myself before posting this. I could have spared the personal details and changed people's names. It'd be very consistent for a cowardly fuck like me. But I think the least that I can do for us both, me and him, is to be honest. I am scared as hell every day. I never stopped thinking about the way that his bones cracked and his teeth came out and his skin sloughed away where they'd beaten it and smashed it like potato. If you hear this, if you're from my town, you know who I am. And you know who you are. And I think that you deserve to be a little scared too. Yesterday, for just a minute, I thought I saw my boss flinch looking at me. He had this look of horror and rage. And when it happened, I knew him inside out. I saw myself, and I looked like him. Maybe sometimes, if you're that scared of seeing your reflection, that's your own fucking fault.